In recent news, as Hillary Clinton became the first female presidential nominee for the Democratic Party, discourse surrounding the wage gap and the glass ceiling became central to her political platform. But what exactly is the wage gap? And if it's so prevalent, why are there plenty of people and articles that exist which debunk it as a myth? And just how does the supposed wage gap really affect women? Let's take some time to find out. The Cambridge Dictionary defines the wage gap, or gender pay gap, by the difference between the amounts of money paid to women and men, often for doing the same work. Now, there are thousands of published articles on the topic of the gender gap. They're authored by Ivy League grads, journalists of the most popular news and media organizations, all the way to personal blog posts of the editorial and opinion-based kind. With all this information, it can be hard to sift fact from fiction. Let's begin by framing the wage gap, what it means for women of different races and ethnicities, because, as we all know, intersectionality is very important to consider when examining any socioeconomic structure that favors the dominant culture. According to the AAUW, among full-time workers in 2015, Hispanic and Latina, African American, American Indian, and Native Hawaiian and other Native women had lower median annual earnings compared with non-Hispanic white and Asian American women. But race and ethnicity aren't the singular contributors to pay discrimination in the workplace. Age also contributes. According to the AAUW, women typically earn about 90% of what men are paid until they hit 35. After that, median earnings for women are typically 76 to 81% of what men are paid. All these statistics are interesting, especially now, as many consider women to have made substantial strides in the race toward equality, that vague goal that exists somewhere on the horizon. And yet, we can't really make any sense of these statistics, or consider them particularly credible, if we don't look at the reasons behind them. Are women paid less just because they're women? Do prominent corporations prefer men in positions of leadership? What exactly is the root of all this contention? If we take a closer look and go back a handful of decades, it's obvious that women's presence in the workplace was not nearly as prominent as it is today. Women were expected to remain home and take care of the children, tending to duties of domesticity. The man, on the other hand, was assumed to be the primary breadwinner, at least within families who could afford to live off of one income. Today, more women work, but they still make less. According to the National Committee on Pay Equity, given their lower earnings, women are usually the parent who takes time off to raise small children. That means they are out of the workforce for a few years, which lowers their earnings when they return. It isn't often a choice for women to take a higher paying job position that requires a stricter schedule, especially if they are required to look after house care and their children on top of the job. Instead, women may go for lower paying jobs with more flexible hours and benefits in order to accommodate their motherhood. According to Avra Siegel, years of cultural bias have been so damaging that in some ways it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Millennial women, who on paper appear better equipped to close the gender gap than any prior generation in terms of education, labor force participation, and other variables, are even less optimistic about successfully balancing their work and family lives than past generations. Another contributing factor for the wage gap, according to the Center for American Progress, is that women are much more likely than men to be clustered in just a few occupations, with nearly half of all working women, 44.4%, employed in just 20 occupations, including secretaries and administrative assistants, registered nurses, and school teachers. Meanwhile, only about one-third, 34.8% of men are employed in the top 20 occupations for male workers, including truck drivers, managers, and supervisors. To that end, the Center for American Progress also notes that not only are women more likely to be concentrated in fewer types of jobs, but those jobs are more likely to be female-dominated, a fact that often leads to lower wages. Female-dominated industries pay lower wages than male-dominated industries, requiring similar skill levels, and the effect is stronger in jobs that require higher levels of education. Women are more likely to be concentrated in low-wage work, and they make up the majority of minimum-wage workers in the United States. So where does this leave us? There are many opinions on how to close the wage gap. Factually, the wage gap exists and is a result of variables that fluctuate across race, class, education, and age. According to the Huffington Post, some simple ways to approach discourse and problem solving about the wage gap are to raise the federal minimum wage, encourage women to discuss pay with coworkers, pass additional wage equality legislation, pass paid family leave, and ensure affordable access to childcare. If we start simple and keep working, we can leave the pay gap in the past, encouraging a more equal, level playing ground for men and women who do the same work.